Case rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask a question of the patron, the senior citizen from... Senior citizen.
I am a senior citizen.
I apologize.
Senator,
That's okay. I am a senior
Senator
citizen.
from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas. Will Senator yield for a question?
Yes, I yield, Mr. President.
I thank the Senator.
I was having flashbacks to yesterday.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you. My question is this. Would Senate Bill 64 make individuals assembling armed on lobby day illegal?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I will respond to the senator that that bill will not make lobby day illegal. What the bill intends to do is prevent future violence like that which we saw in Charlottesville. And unless these groups are assembled expressly for the purpose of intimidating others, the bill does not apply to them. This bill specifically applies to people who assemble with the intent of intimidating people.
Mr. President.
And Senator, former Senator from Petersburg, the Senator from Fairfax, Senator Peterson, rise.
If I might, if I could basically respond to
Senator Loud, Senator Peterson.
Chesterfield's question.
Go ahead. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Thank you for yielding. Senator has the floor.
I might speak on behalf of the committee. We made a very substantive amendment which nobody has addressed yet. And if you look at the language, you notice it cross-references Section 18.2-282. That is a criminal code statute which references brandishing. Right. Brandishing is when you not only have a weapon on you, but you actually point it at somebody with the intent of causing fear or intimidation. So it's not just assembling with weapons or drilling or Boy Scouts. It's when you actually take a weapon and brandish it at somebody, which is already a felony in Virginia, with the intent in causing fear for that. We made that change specifically in the courts committee, or whatever we call it now.
Judiciary.
Judiciary. In order to accomplish the purpose that Senator Lucas asked us to.
Senator, is there further questions, Senator?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I have one further question from the Senator from Fairfax City.
From Fairfax City, will you yield for another question?
Thank you.
If Senator Lucas doesn't mind, sure.
Senator from Portsmouth, you okay?
Don't mind at all.
All right, thank the Senator. Senator yields. You have the floor.
Thank you. Just for clarification, so on Lobby Day, we had a number of citizens from around Virginia and across the country, actually,
right,
who came here with long guns and all different types of guns, peacefully assembling. And if there is someone here is it potential for someone that is here to feel threatened or uncomfortable or whatever, is there any potential for them saying that that's an activity that would not be permitted?
Senator has the floor.
The short answer to that is the felony of brandishing already takes into that account. And I'm looking at the language right now, and it says, it shall be unlawful for any person to point, hold, or brandish any firearm, basically with the intent of reasonably inducing fear in the mind of another. I'm sort of breezing down the language. That's been on our books for a long time. So if people are here peaceably assembled, then that's a First Amendment right, and they're exercising their First Amendment right. If myself or you or anybody else is walking to the Capitol and they take a firearm and point it at us and say, if you vote for a gun control bill, that's going to be your last day in this building, that is potentially a brandishing.
That's
so
right.
I'm not asking everyone to support this bill, but the bottom line is it does not do what some of the folks think it does.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to thank
Senator Lucas.
Yes, Mr. President. I just want to thank the senator for helping me to clarify that information, because as I indicated, this bill intends only to prevent future violence, and it's only reference to people who assemble with the intent of intimidating people. And as Senator Peterson has indicated, that if you were to take your gun and point it at me and say, I'm going to shoot you, well, then yes, that's what this bill is intended to address. So with that, Mr. President, I renew my motion that the bill pass.
I thank the Senator. I think Senator from King George. For what purpose does Senator Stewart rise?
Well, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, we did have a pretty robust debate about this in the Courts of Justice Committee, and I appreciate and respect and understand what the patron wants to do, and the bill does do that. It's sort of the title is misleading. It says paramilitary activities, but you don't have to be involved in a paramilitary activity to be convicted under the statute. But certainly if there were a group of individuals in uniforms with weapons displaying them and trying to intimidate people, you could prosecute them under this statute. The problem is the statute draws in a whole lot of people besides that group. And so, technically speaking, if I and a friend of mine were standing in a public area in hunting gear and I'm holding a shotgun like this, and my friend is too, and somebody who's very uncomfortable with guns walks by and I say something that they determine was intimidating, I could be charged under this. And here's the problem with these kinds of laws. We intend to stop a group of people who clearly want to try to intimidate and harass other people. And I agree with that. But when you craft a law like this, you've got to be careful not to bring others in it. Because a fact finder, either a judge or a jury, is going to make a determination after the fact. Not while it's happening. They can't know what that person means or thinks at the time, but a fact finder after the incident will infer what happened. And there's typically a standard of reasonableness. And so my concern with this bill is it just goes too far. It's much like the brandishing statute, which was incorporated in it. And under that, if I'm holding a gun, and I can be holding it not in a threatening manner, hold it right across my chest, and I'm talking to someone while I'm holding that weapon across my chest, not pointing it, not threatening them. But if they're afraid of guns, they are afraid of what I'm doing. And I'm intimidating them without even intentionally intimidating them. And if you look across the Commonwealth, there are countless people who have been convicted of brandishing a firearm simply on those grounds. And so all I ask is, if you want to stop these groups, and neo-Nazis or whatever they are that are intimidating people, I agree with that. But let's confine it to that, and let's not bring other citizens into these, because you're setting them up to be convicted for not doing anything wrong.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, Senator from Henrico? Senator Donovan, rise.
Just to clarify,
There's the floor.
it is the juxtaposition of number 1 in this bill on line 12 with number 3 on line 20, in that many young men and women get their firearm training from the Scouts. Without the Scouts necessarily, they have no control over the future behavior, but that's where their training was obtained. And I will tell you, obviously the Boy Scouts are very cautious. They do youth training. They take a lot of precautions, and they're adverse to being put in any jeopardy. But in this situation, they have a great deal of concern that the teaching that they do in firearm safety will subsequently be affiliated with bad judgment of somebody they trained at a later time. And I think that's their concern about an unintended consequence of this bill, but they are deeply concerned. And I wanted to share with that. Based on that, I feel like it's not ready for prime time. I'm sorry this didn't come up in committee, but it was shared with me. And so that is the issue that I'm addressing that I'm very concerned about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose, Senator from Russell? Senator Chafin, rise.
Mr. President, I rise to talk about the bill.
Senator has the floor.
And I heard the testimony in committee, and I'm concerned, like some of my colleagues, about the unintended consequences of the bill. I think the gentlelady from Portsmouth has the most honorable of intentions with regard to her bill. I think she seeks to address those things that occurred in Charlottesville, which were horrendous. And we all know that. We all believe that. We'd all want to avoid that. But, Mr. President, we're coming off on the heels of the largest assembly of individuals in support of the First Amendment in this city, in the capital city, since the Civil Rights Movement. We've not seen that many people assemble here in Richmond in support of their First Amendment rights and in support of their Second Amendment rights. So, Mr. President, we've seen bills this session that have passed and may become law, that we've seen bills that are prohibition of guns, that call for the prohibition of guns in certain circumstances. We've seen bills that in certain circumstances call for the confiscation of guns in certain circumstances. We've seen, now we're seeing what I fear, the unintended consequences, is the suppression of guns, the suppression of the carrying and the outward display of an individual's constitutionally protected rights under the Second Amendment to carry and possess a firearm. And I know everything in me from my years as an attorney, my time as working as a prosecutor. I know in my heart there will be unintended consequences to this. I know that we have different opinions about firearms in this Commonwealth. When we hear about firearms from different witnesses, we have people who are very comfortable with them. They're as comfortable with firearms as they are with the handkerchief that a lot of gentlemen carry in their pocket. And then we have people who look at a firearm as though it's a snake. They're afraid of it. They don't like the firearm. And they fear the firearm. And naturally, they are offended and fear those who display the firearm. So I am very concerned, Mr. President, that those individuals will be so offended, genuinely offended, that they will fear and they will take charge. And once again, the potential is there for good, law-abiding people who have absolutely no evil in their heart, no bad intent, no intention to do anything, carrying their gun completely unloaded, to be charged. And they will be forced to undergo the expense, the humiliation of a public charge, of having to hire an attorney, of having to appear before a court of law, perhaps before a jury of their peers to defend themselves. That's what I fear about this bill, Mr. President, and I agree with the gentlelady from Henrico. I don't think the bill is quite ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding Senate Bill 64? For what purpose does Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds rise?
Mr. President, just briefly to speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
I think the gentleman's fears are entirely misplaced. You have to read this bill and have to read it with the brandishing of a firearm statute, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor, Class 6 felony in certain situations, and only if a reasonable man is intimidated or put in fear by the brandishing of a firearm does the statute take effect. There's no violation unless there's a reasonable expectation or intimidation from the activity that occurs. I've prosecuted and defended these cases. If there's not a reasonable expectation or if there's not a reasonable idea that the person is going to be intimidated by the conduct, there's no criminal offense.
What purpose does Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, speak to the bill.
I
appreciate the Senator from Bath's comments. We've heard on the floor during the course of this session how reasonable people from different parts of the state react to somebody holding a firearm. We had a lot of people from across Virginia who came from different backgrounds here in Richmond back on January 20. And if you canvass people in this room, I would suspect that there was a wide variety of reactions as to whether they were in fear for their safety. And I've heard some of my colleagues on both sides in the House and the Senate say that they were afraid. Notwithstanding the fact that nothing happened. We heard comments about somebody actually displaying a firearm in public in Alexandria at a farmer's market, and how people there were afraid. I would suspect that guy, if there was somebody else with them, they'd have been charged under this statute. And I don't know whether they'd have been convicted, but my guess is that they might be convicted in Alexandria, but might not be convicted in Bath County. So, what we're doing is we're adopting a standard that creates a crime depending upon who's perceiving it. And it may be a crime in one part of the state, but not in another part of the state. So be careful where you come visit. And when I heard the questions and responses about Lobby Day, I suspect, especially given some of the reactions to Lobby Day this year, that there are going to be people who are going to be charged for simply coming to Richmond who want to defend their Second Amendment rights. I think this statute is one that is going to create serious disparities from one part of the state and discrepancies from one part of the state to another. And I would certainly hope that we would take a step back and not pass this.
Do any senators other than the patron wish to be heard regarding Senate Bill 64? Seeing none, call the senator from Portsmouth, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. President. And before I move to pass the bill again, I just want to make one statement, and that is that my daddy had 14 brothers and one sister. They all had guns. I grew up around guns, all kinds of guns. Each one of their children loved guns, was never afraid of guns. I was never afraid for one moment on Rally Day. The only thing that bothers me is when people brandish their firearms. And that's what this bill is intended to get to. And so with that, Mr. President, I would like to renew my motion that the bill pass.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall Senate Bill 64 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 21, noes 19.
Ayes 21, noes 19. Senate Bill 64 passed.